As kids, we grew up admiring our heroes, whether they were comic book heroes or mere mortals. We looked up to them and we wanted to be like them. As adults, we continue to look up to extraordinary people and emulate their deeds. And there's nothing wrong with that. Many great minds down through the ages have highly recommended hero worship. Niccolò Machiavelli, for example, said, "A prudent man should always follow in the footsteps of great men and imitate those who have been outstanding." But is it enough to copy those who we admire? Can that make each of us more successful in our own careers? Should we read autobiographical advice books written by superstars and try to mimic their choices? Roger Martin, today's guest, would probably agree that it could help, but it's not enough. Following best practice, he writes in his new book, can be an advantage, but it also poses a danger. By emulating what a great leader did in a particular situation, you'll likely be terribly disappointed with your own results. And why? Because your situation is different. In his new book entitled The Opposable Mind, How Successful Leaders Win Through Integrative Thinking, Roger profiles innovators as varied as Procter & Gamble chief A.G. Leifley, choreographer Martha Graham, and Red Hat co-founder Bob Young. The core idea, which I'll let him explain more fully, is that innovative thinkers use constructive tension from two conflicting ideas to arrive at a new, superior idea. The whole concept sounds a little daunting, but it's also one that has won Roger Martin a great deal of praise. Malcolm Gladwell, bestseller author of Blink and The Tipping Point, calls The Opposable Mind brilliant and utterly convincing. Professor Martin himself has been worthy recipient of a number of honors. In 2004, he won the Marshall McLuhan Visionary Leadership Award. As Dean of the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, he has been named by Business Week as one of the 10 best business school all-stars, one of those select few who have revolutionized business education. In his 10 years as Dean, the Rotman School has aspired to be the best, and he has succeeded. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to our podium today our very special guest, Dean of the Rotman School of Management, Roger Martin.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Alan, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak here at the Canadian Club. And thanks, Don, to RIM. RIM is a company near and dear to my heart, and I'm pleased to have this talk sponsored by RIM. So you might ask the question, why write a book about thinking and not doing? What's the use of thinking without doing? I would agree. Any thought is going to be judged on the basis of whether it leads to useful action or not. The reason I got interested in this is as I read through many books about what highly successful people do, typically their autobiographies, and tried to distill from that the common patterns, what I found was enormously hard to do that. In fact, I found there weren't very many common patterns. In fact, each of these highly successful people seemed to do something that was appropriate to their given situation, but that might not be so appropriate to any other situation. And even some of the leaders that are extremely popular leaders who've done very well, like Jack Welch, for example, contradicted himself, arguably, with his actions within his own career. Now, this is not a criticism of Jack Welch, who I think is a brilliantly successful leader, but it's indicative of the challenge. Early on in his career, he said to his entire company, unless you're really big, I'm going to get rid of you. Right? He said, if you're not number 1 or 2 in size in your industry, I will divest you. And actually, people within GE and outside thought he was kidding, but he wasn't, and ended up getting rid of about 25% of the portfolio on the basis of companies that weren't among the top 2 in their industry. About 15 years later, toward the end of his career, he was giving a very different set of instructions His instructions to his companies were that they could not come to their planning meetings saying they were big. They had to define themselves as little, less than 15% share of their market. And you'd say, well, why early on did the thing he did say, I'm going to divest you unless you're big, and then later on say, I'm going to get mad at you unless you're little? Well, the reason is early on he had a portfolio that was a mess and that he wanted to clean up. And later on, he worried about growth. And when his jet engine business came in and said, we have 70% market share, so we can't grow, he said, no, to define yourself small. You're not in the jet engine business. You're in the business of perhaps repairing those and servicing those jet engines, perhaps financing those jet engines, et cetera. So if we look at what he did and try to understand, well, what should we do on the basis of what Jack Welch did, that would be a hard trick. I would say it would be a hard trick if we looked across successful leaders to come to the commonalities. So that was what I faced as I tried to answer for myself the question, well, if you'd like to be as successful as these folks, what's up? And I decided to interview as many of them as I could, and thankfully, lots of them were willing to be interviewed. So Jack Welch was, Izzy Sharp, Four Seasons, Bob Young, A.G. Lafley of Procter & Gamble, Meg Whitman, Michael Dell, a whole list, including a bunch of these fascinating, fantastic Indian CEOs, Nandan Nilekani, Ramalinga Raju, K.V. Kamath. I interviewed all of them to try and figure out if there were common patterns in how they thought. So even though they had many, many different situations, contexts, in which they did myriad things that made no consistent sense, I wondered if there wasn't a pinch point between those two things. A million contexts, a million actions, and a pinch point in between, which is how they thought that produced those actions. And on the basis of doing over 50 in-depth interviews with these folks, I came to the conclusion that indeed there is a pattern, that there's something very common in the way they think that enables them to produce these highly successful outcomes. And so you might ask, what is that? Well, the most common thing and the most critical thing that I saw is that these leaders, when facing a choice, a trade-off between two or more alternatives, but let's just say for simplicity's sake, two alternatives, neither of which fit their goals, instead of thinking of their job as choosing the best of the two, analyzing the two and saying which is the best, even though neither is entirely satisfactory, which of these two is the best. Instead of doing that, which, by the way, most people in that situation do, they just choose, they refuse to choose, and instead use the presence of those two or more models to generate a third model, a better model than either. And as you look at the success of these leaders, you can see that the success is a product of doing just that. So if we just take a great Canadian and a great Canadian business success, but he's a great Canadian because he's such a wonderful philanthropist as well, Izzy Sharp, who founded Four Seasons, by far and away the number one in size and reputation luxury hotel chain in the world. He faced early in his career a choice between the two models that were prevalent in the industry. And one model, which he actually used for his first property, which was the Four Seasons Motor Inn on Jarvis Street, which some of you may well remember, was a classic motel model. 125 rooms, very few amenities, but loads of kind of intimacy and a nice friendly place to be, and the local watering hole for the folks who worked around the corner at the CBC, as I understand from Izzy. And many people from the CBC who tell me this at the time. That was one model, and it was, and there you could find such motels kind of around the world, and it was a highly successful model. He made lots of money. It was a great hotel. His fourth hotel was the Sheraton, which was in a joint venture with the Sheraton, Four Seasons Sheraton on Queen Street across from City Hall. And it was the classic other model, which is a large convention hotel. In this case, 1,600 rooms. It had all the amenities you could ever want, multiple restaurants, workout facilities, conference facilities, teleconference facilities, a shopping arcade underneath it. All the things that big convention hotels had. And it was also successful, and it also made money for Izzy. But he was faced with these two models, and he liked some things about each. So he liked the intimacy of his Four Seasons Motor Inn, and he loved the amenities that he could provide with the scale of his Four Seasons Sheraton. But at the Four Seasons Sheraton, there was not any sense of intimacy. It was a cold, impersonal place, and he didn't like that. And he didn't like the fact that he couldn't offer in the small scale the amenities that he wanted. Now, everybody at the time told him, those are the two models, and the world told him, those are the two models, pick, go and do it. Build a chain of motels or build a chain of convention hotels. And if he had done that, I don't think we'd have ever heard of Izzy Sharp, probably. And he wouldn't be a fantastically wealthy Canadian who gives fantastic amounts of money away to charitable causes and the like. Why is he what he is today? It's because instead of in that very critical moment choosing between the two available models, he said, nope, not good enough, and he created a better model, which is the medium-sized luxury hotel, considered to be smaller in the number of rooms than minimum necessary to fund all the amenities you need. So his hotels are between 225 and 400 rooms. 400 is considered below the minimum. You just can't do it. How does he do it? How does he fund the amenities he needs? Because last time I checked, I don't know about you, last time you stayed at the Four Seasons, did you feel a lack of the amenities you'd like it? No, I don't think so. How does he do it? Well, did you check your bill? If you did, and you're good with a calculator and had some competitive data, you'd realize that his entire chain, across the entire chain, earns a 33% average revenue per room night premium over luxury hotels like the Ritz-Carlton. So a massive, massive price premium is how he does it. How does he do that? It's by a different definition of service. He went at service and said, well, what do my busy travelers who stay in these hotels really care about? And what he came to the conclusion of is that they don't want grand decor and obsequious service. What they miss more than anything else is their home and their office. And why do you think they miss those? Well, your home is your nest. That's where you'd like to be. And your office is where you're surrounded with infrastructure that helps you do your job. So Four Seasons Hotels he was the first to put shampoo in the showers and a bathrobe in the closet and a hairdryer in the bathroom. Why would that be? Makes you feel like you're at home. First to have a big desk, working desk with two-line telephone, 24-hour secretarial service, etc. Why? Makes you feel like you're at the office and you have that infrastructure to help you out. So consistently across the 55 interviews I did, the same thing over and over again. When faced with that choice, they, instead of choosing, said, these are unsatisfactory, these are fundamentally unsatisfactory to me, and I'm going to come up with a better answer. Now you'd say, well, that's easy to say, Roger, but how did they come up with a better answer? What was the thinking process that they engaged in that caused them to be able to come up with that better answer? Well, step one on that is these folks were willing to think about more things, consider, as I say in the book, more things to be salient to the question at hand than the folks who felt that there was only one of these two models. So in the case of Izzy Sharp, it was that insight about the travelers. He was willing to go deeper into the traveler's psyche and mindset to say, actually, even though they're staying in a luxury hotel and this is luxurious and maybe that's a good place for them, that they actually wish they weren't there. They wish they were either at home or the office. And so when he put the shampoo in the showers, it was purposeful in helping them feel like they were at home. And all of those things have been copied, but I actually believe to this day they were copied because they were successful at Four Seasons, not because of the understanding of the customer. So he thought about different things than his competitors. The next thing is they think in more sophisticated ways about the causal relationships between the factors that they think about. So they think about more factors, in this case, more things about the customer, and are willing to say, well, I need to think carefully about how that then plays out in relation to other things. So if customers need to feel that level of service, in Izzy Sharp's case, he said, well, how do I have to think about my employees? How does the way I think about my employees relate to the kind of service I can provide? And came to the conclusion that he had to follow what he calls the golden rule policy, which is to say, I need to treat my employees like I'd want to be treated myself, because the only way they're going to treat my guests the way I'd like them to be treated is if they feel treated that way themselves. A more sophisticated understanding of that causal relationship than most of his competitors, who treat their hotel employees as more expendable. In the downturn, they can be laid off. They don't need a lot of training, all things that he did at the Four Seasons. So these folks, to get to that creative resolution, think about more things, consider more things salient, think in more sophisticated ways about the causal relationships. And then the third thing is they consider the problem in a holistic way rather than split it down into chunks and then try to add the chunks up. So the most common thing in business is to take problems and parse them. Parse them either in time. We're going to figure out this first. We're going to figure out where the plant is first, and then we're going to figure out how big the plant is and then who we're going to sell to. Right? Or break it up at the same time to various functions. You figure out marketing, you figure out sales, you figure out operations, and add them up and hope somehow that comes up with a good answer. Consistently across all these folks, that is not what they did. What they did was they looked at it as a whole. And in the case of Izzy Sharp, one of the nifty manifestations of that is, even though they earn their price premium on the basis of service, they have no customer service department. There is none in Four Seasons. Why? It's because all of it has to do with service. Everybody has to do with creating that service together. And that's consistent with the holistic way that Four Seasons looks at that question. Okay? So the pattern then is that I saw across these is a thinking pattern that says, when faced with a choice that looks unsatisfactory, I'm not going to choose. I'm going to think a little bit harder and come up with another model by being willing to take on a little more complexity in terms of what I think about, in terms of the causal relationships, and making sure that I don't break it down into pieces, but look at it holistically. So if that's the how they do it, then we might ask the question is, if you would like to make decisions like that, like these highly successful folks, like Bob Young of Red Hat, who faced the choice of saying, do I do a proprietary software company where I invest all sorts of money in R&D to create proprietary software, or do I do free software, which wasn't actually free, which was selling shrink-wrapped Linux packages for $15 by catalog or mail order? Said, I don't like either of those models, because I can't make enough money and ever be significant selling $15 shrink-wrap software, and I can't start from where I am with Linux and produce proprietary software because it isn't proprietary. Says instead, I'm going to give it away for free on the internet, downloadable from the internet, so that we get the dominant market share, so that companies start to view us as a big enough company to do business with, and we will sell them service, not software, because they need their software serviced just like they do with the big proprietary players. Okay? So If that's the kind of solutions you want to come up with, what can you do to become more of an integrative thinker? Because I believe it is in everybody's capability to do what I've described. But we train ourselves not to do it. That's the problem, right? And you sort of have to untrain yourself. And what's the biggest problem? What's the biggest linchpin? It is confusing the models that are out there with reality. So how many times have you been told by somebody the reality of the situation is X? Right? Everybody here? The truth of the matter is Y. That is actually the enemy. Because the minute you do that, right, you imagine that you are staring at reality, and like Izzy Sharp, you could be told, the reality is, Izzy, you got to choose this or that. Those are the only two models out there. Right? Step one is rejecting that and saying, you know what? All of those things are just constructions. They're things we construct in our mind. We construct models in our mind and then go and apply the models. And we get confused that they're reality. And we do this a lot. We were confused, when this clever guy came along, Newton, and said, the reality is, here's the three fundamental laws of physics, right? And we accepted that for actually 150 years as reality until some goofy patent clerk came along and said, no, maybe that's not actually reality. Now that's in the world of physics. Imagine when we say, well, customers will never buy that. That's the reality of the situation. The minute you do that, you don't search for another model. My pet peeve on this is, for the last 5 years, I've been saying, we need to lower corporate income taxes in this country. And I've been told for 5 consecutive years by everyone, you can't possibly do that. It's impossible. The reality is that the electorate won't listen to arguments about corporate tax cuts, right? What happened here at the Canadian Club about 6 months ago? Stéphane Dion came and said, I'm going to slash corporate tax rates. What did Jim Flaherty do a couple of months ago? Say, I can beat that. I can slash them more. So the reality is that the electorate won't listen to arguments about that. That's a political third rate? No, it is not. Okay? So that's number one, is recognize that everything you see in the world of business, everything you see is a construction. It's not reality. It's somebody's model, number one. Number two is then to say, if there are different constructions out there that are at tension with one another, the job is not simply choosing from among those two visions of reality, but if you don't like either of them, you use those two models to generate a better model than the ones you have. Again, if you think models are reality and somebody disagrees with your model, they must be by definition wrong. If you think models are merely constructions, you'll say there may be something in that other model that is something that I can use, as did Izzy Sharp, as did Bob Young, as did Dick Curry, as did A.G. Lafley, etc., to create a better model than the one that you had to start with. Right? So that's what I call one's stance. One's stance is either to believe that models are reality, and so when you have conflicting models, you've got a problem on your hand, and your job is to make sure you get rid of one of those models and commit fully to the other model. And that's what I call a conventional thinking stance. An integrative thinking stance says models are not reality; they're merely constructions. Opposing models are terrific; they're a gift. And various of the thinkers that I interviewed were very specific about that. A.G. Lafley, the brilliant CEO of Procter & Gamble, said, if there's only one model that I'm presented with, it makes me really, really nervous. I need to have more than one because that's the only way I'm going to get to a really good model rather than one. So with the integrative thinker, models, opposing models, conflicting models are a gift, and those opposing models can be leveraged to create the new model. Just like Izzy Sharp needed the insight about intimacy and needed the insight about amenities to create a new model. Now, is this some absolutely fantastic, revolutionary new idea? I wish I could say it is. It's not. F. Scott Fitzgerald, in his famous quote 62 years ago, said the sign of a first-class mind is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your mind and not lose the capacity to think or to function. A nice quote. Another clever man 100 years ago named Thomas Chamberlain, who went on to be the president of the University of Wisconsin, argued for in thinking about things you have to have multiple working hypotheses, not just one. And if you want to go back even 100 years earlier than that, Hegel said there's a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So it's not a new idea that I'm arguing for. I think we've known for a long time that having a multiplicity of ideas helps out. But I think, to a great extent, we've trained ourselves to search for the one answer, to fight competing models rather than utilize them, to get into a world where if somebody walks into the room with an alternative view than yours, it's a problem, not an opportunity. And what that does is make it harder for us to be as effective thinkers as we can. And I would argue that if we reverse a couple of those things and start practicing our model creating ability, we will become much more valuable, because model choosers, people who are good at analyzing two models and choosing the least worst of them, are only worth so much. They only create so much value in life. And those who work at, in the face of that, not choosing from among those, but rather utilizing them to create another one, are the ones who create as much value as humanly possible. That's busily what we're doing at the Rotman School, is teaching students not to be model choosers, but how to be model builders. It's a work in progress, but I can tell you that it's going well, and we will be graduating a generation of folks who I believe will change the world on the basis of their ability to create marvelous new models. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. So there's a couple of questions here. The first one is, as a teacher, I'm worried that this could be a huge leap for coming generations. Kids aren't being taught to puzzle things out. Are you concerned about this?
Yes, I am concerned. I mean, I'm concerned that teachers, either because they want to or because they feel bound by curricula, think they've got to teach a model and convince students that this is correct. This model is correct, and then test the student's ability on the basis of can they play back the model in question. And I think that is selling our students short and not teaching them to think that their job in life is to be able to hold opposing models in their mind and doing something useful with that opposition. So I guess I would encourage every teacher in the room, and there are a number of folks from my faculty and others, Humber and the like, to give your students a chance to let models oppose, and don't ask them to reach closure too quickly. Again, a number of the interviewees who I had the pleasure of talking to, one brilliant one, Victoria Hale, who created the first non-profit pharmaceutical company in the world and created a cure for black fever, which is going to save, when it's fully rolled out, 500,000 people a year from dying a miserable death. at $10 a person. Fantastic breakthrough. But she emphasized in creating this that her approach is to, when she's got conflicting models, she says, quote, I just sit with it, let it roll around before I lock and load. And I'm not sure that we encourage students enough to do that. And there's one methodology that is sure to discourage them from doing that, right? Timed tests.
Thanks. Maybe you can take these two together. Mm-hmm. How do you tell if you're practicing integrative thinking rather than just seeking a compromise or hybrid? And are there current assessment tools or instruments that may be available now or that you're developing?
Good question. On the first, you would know it on the basis of whether the solution you come up with is better than both models, right? Or if it's just a compromise, a combination of the two. Right? In the case of Izzy Sharp, if you'd have just said, I will build a medium-sized hotel that is less intimate than little ones and has crappier amenities than big ones, again, we wouldn't be talking about them, and we would know that that's a compromise. Medium amenities and medium intimacy. No. Instead, he creates a model that allows him to afford to build a level of intimacy into larger than motel size, 125 to 200 room hotels, and every amenity that you could imagine. So that's how you would judge it. Are there assessment tools yet? Nope, because this is we're working away at the very leading edge of this, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in that to go help us work on it.
I'll give you one more opportunity to plug Rotman.
Oh, okay. I always am happy to do that, as you know.
Is integrative thinking going to be a new management course or added to existing business curricula in other schools?
Well, I think it's becoming recognized that the business curricula leave something to be desired, and there are leading schools, and the people who write about this say we're doing it, Yale, Stanford, to change, and the change is in, I think, the direction of a greater understanding of the need to integrate. So I think, and at our school, now students start out in the first semester, first year with a Foundations of Integrative Thinking course, and then at the end of first year an Integrative Thinking practicum, and second year we're starting this year a capstone. So we're adding courses. I think each school is taking a different approach to it. I'll say, and this may sound slightly esoteric, but I think there's two schools of thought emerging, and we're in one, and there are a bunch of others are in the other. One school says that there are certain integrations that you should be able to do. So marketing is tied to finance in the following way, and we should teach you essentially financial marketing. That's an integration that we should teach you, right? Versus which I used to think was the right answer. I'm in the school now of saying, no, it's the act of integrating that we need to teach you. We need to teach you how to be in the world and have a skill set that allows you to engage in the act of integrating. Because there are there are myriad integrations that you will have to do depending on the situation, depending on your company, depending the time, and trying to teach you each and every one of those would be an impossible task in my view. And the more powerful one is teaching the act of integrating, and that's what our research work at Rotman and our curriculum is working toward.
Roger, thank you. I'm going to call Alison Lote to more formally thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, for joining us today. As someone who is midway through reading The Opposable Mind, I've enjoyed learning how, through the practice of integrative thinking, we can all learn and achieve. Roger referred to the quote by the American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald, where he describes first-rate intelligence as the ability to, quote, hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. When Fitzgerald said this, I think he was referring to something of a slightly higher order than one of the tensions many of us may be facing today. 1 week to Christmas, 0 gifts purchased. So, with autographed copies available at the entrance, it seems to me that the opposable mind can help you address tensions of a higher as well as a more immediate and practical order. Again, Roger, thank you for joining us today. It is a privilege for all of us at Rotman to have you as a colleague, and it's been a privilege for all of us here at the Canadian Club to hear you speak today. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and we wish you all the very best of the season.